school. And here's our beautiful title slide. So the context for this paper is I'm thinking through the embodied analytic and as a site where methods of entrainment are rooted in deliberately causing trauma to the body, and this being a space where entrainment happens in a partially unsafe environment. This talk was drafted on the original homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa people. This panel acknowledges that drum corps ensembles travel throughout the entire United States, physically marching across the traditional homelands of Indigenous peoples. By naming colonialism as an ongoing process, we take a moment here to be mindful of our present participation both in this space and in this activity. On June 18th, 2022, the Crossman Drum and Bugle Corps Horn Line was instructed to sprint around the goalposts of the Kansas Wesleyan University football stadium. Once the field was still, my boss, Bill, reminds the performers that we're attempting to simulate performance conditions. On day 23 of 85 of their summer season, the performers had already rehearsed for 8 hours in the 98-degree Kansas heat. They have 2.5 hours to go. This is what they performed.
As soon as you're back, pick your instrument up.
Sound warning.
Gonna move some air, we're gonna finish this out. Pick them up, pick them up, pick them up. Pick them up, pick them up. Go.
Gnarly. In this example, instructors coach the performers through a megaphone to remind students of their simultaneous responsibilities. Instructors stand feet away from the performers as they sprint by, listening but mostly watching, despite it being a music rehearsal. Feet, Bill shouts at the performers as an obsession with precise timing is physically and verbally disciplined into the performers' bodies through an extended, intense rehearsal of their 2022 program, a Mobius trip. I am a scholar practitioner of the North American Drum and Bugle Corps tradition. First and foremost, I'm a marching arts community member that cares deeply for the safety and sustainability of our activity. Second, I'm a music theorist that happens to be a visual instructor. My concern for the future of this art is what motivates my presentation today. In this presentation, I interrogate the drum corps activity's obsession with the rehearsal of precise pulse articulations and its effects on the body memories of performers. I approach embodied meter as a method of ensemble and individual control, and critically examine the extent to which marginalized performers are disproportionately affected by the power dynamics exercised through the drum corps rehearsal process. By thinking through the consequences of embodiment as a form of control, I hope to problematize the embodiment analytic as a neutral framework. The assimilation of individual construction of beats into the ensemble is achieved through intersubjective synchronization. One of the greatest obstacles to a cohesive drum corps performance is an individual performer's changing relationship to their co-performers. Visual rehearsals reinforce the performer's understandings and externally assessed articulations of spatial and temporal relationships to one another. Typically, the first block or section of rehearsal in a day, visual rehearsals remove the simultaneous playing responsibilities for brass performers, and they have an opportunity to reconcile embodied meters solidified in previous music rehearsals with their physical movement responsibilities. Visual rehearsals range from half an hour to 4 hours in length. 1 or 2 instructors stand at the top of the stadium and assess the overall development of the ensemble visual performance, with 3 to 5 additional instructors staying at the field level to observe and sometimes police individual performers' feet timing, dot and choreographic accuracy, and overall individual relationship to the form. Here's footage from a visual rehearsal with the cadets in 2018. Earlier, I joked with the panelists that visual rehearsals are just men yelling, while cast members try their best to avoid being the object of critique. But visual rehearsals can also offer rare time in drum corps for performers to make mistakes as they navigate moving and playing. Simpson, Litke, and Stover theorized choreographically rooted connections of simultaneous responsibilities in American Canadian salsa dancing. The dancers in their work make decisions about how to attend to musical features via their footwork orientations. In the North American drum corps context, instructors discipline performers' bodies through an unrelenting focus on performers' articulations of embodied meter through marching. Performers certainly make decisions about foot placement, step size, and pathway, but drum corps performers receive additional intention, typically only when they have made a visible error. Here's an example of how this intense focus plays out in rehearsal. This is part of a YouTube series where instructors are mic'd during rehearsal. Aaron Bailey, a visual caption head in the world class, gives feedback to students as they perform an across the floor exercise.
It's a little fast. Nice and smooth. Every aspect has to be in time. That's the initiation. That's also the smoothness and the control of the timing of the close. 8-1.
The performers are completely silent while they perform the across the floor exercise stoically, as visual instructors yell over the metronome to give a mix of individual and general feedback. Like Simpson, Litke, and Stover's dancers, drum corps performers attend to musical features, namely pulse, but including musically informed choreography. These are accented by predetermined footwork and visual responsibilities. But the very design of drum corps productions imposes limits on choreographic possibilities, including limits on performers' abilities to express an understanding of the meter they have been asked to embody. Battery percussionist instruments are attached to their bodies with carriers and harnesses, and brass players often hold their horns in their hand while performing choreography. Bell angles and scenery prop positions can obscure performers' view of timing sources. When performers cannot watch conductors for timing, they must engage with what Mark Butler calls construing beats, moving one's own body to create their own metrical interpretation. In this example, Watch's Blue Coats mellophone player Andrew Himmelstein engages in construing beats by falling back on pause. A little too soon there. Andrew Himmelstein engages in construing beats by falling back on another source of timing, a pre-planned vocal that helps his pod of fellow mellophone performers maintain pulse synchronization through body movement that directs their head focus away from the drumming.
The bread of God is bread. Hey, look at that. Bobby, I told you not to look at the tape.
Really great King of the Hill reference there. Whether you see it as classic band kid silliness or as a coping mechanism for navigating an intense rehearsal environment, the style of Andrew's headcam not only works against headcam conventions that aim to show viewers a virtuosic, perfect run-through from the field perspective, he allows us to see where he directs his eyes and attention to each set of the show. Visual proficiency adjudicators, judges, see this performer responsibility and credit performers with demonstration of training and pulse maintenance as they assess and sample both individual performers and the ensemble for a competitive purpose. The combination of pedagogical tradition and competitive criteria place emphasis on performers' awareness and consistent replication of embodied meter. Foot timing and pulse maintenance are skills presented to instructors and performers as essential for the success of the ensemble. There's a competitive incentive to follow these, frankly, vague judging sheets, especially for groups on the verge of making finals in the top 12 and semifinals in the top 25. Here's the schedule for the 2022 DCI World Championship Prelims competition. The first group, Colt Cadets, performs at 10:40 a.m. The amount of rest and rehearsal time the Colt Cadets receive is entirely determined by DCI's schedule. More than 12 hours later, the Blue Devils step off at 11:03 p.m. With less than an hour of travel time to Lucas Oil Stadium, The Blue Devils are less constrained by their performance time than any of the previous 34 groups. Lost rehearsal time due to poor competitive placement and subsequent earlier show times result in decreased rehearsal time but increased rehearsal intensity. Strategies for embodying meter and maintaining pulse synchronization become a point of obsession under such great competitive pressure. The consequences of an obsession with staying in time as a consistent replication and articulation of pulse results in a form of body discipline that fundamentally alters the body memory of drum corps performers. Visual rehearsals have traditionally employed disciplinary tactics like running for mistakes, raising your hand when you've made an error, or marking on your body with a Sharpie when you make errors. Visual rehearsals also reinforce an extreme form of what Stephen Hudson calls a performative listening practice. Performers refined their listening practices and strategies by drawing on available strategies and adjusting based on the intentional strategy that first helps them stay in time and second does not draw negative attention to their individual role. Performers cycle through shared strategies. When an ensemble listening strategy is not viable due to location on the field, restricted visibility, or other demands of performance, they find a secondary strategy. This is Brad Sparks, an instructor at Madison Scouts, Excel spreadsheet of model of metronome placement on the field and an appropriate physical radius for listening to the Met. Listening to the Met becomes an embodied practice as performers learn to entrain in the same listening environment day after day. Outside of Sparks' green zone, performers entrain either slightly ahead or behind the metronome to coordinate the music in visual ensemble. This is to say nothing in the front ensemble who is doing God knows what to stay in time. Performers have a critically small window of time to adjust, and they rely on rehearsal experiences to practice recovery. By entraining slightly ahead or behind, performers learn to hear the Met but not listen to it. Their body memory crystallizes as they count ahead or behind. Here's one example of the culmination of hundreds of hours of rehearsal with the Bluecoats color guard during a critical moment in their 2022 show. Cast member Connor O'Neill draws on previous experiences of embodying pulse to navigate a fraught timing environment as the color guard fully grapples with visual synchronization with the front ensemble almost 60 feet in front of them with speakers pointed toward the audience. I encourage you in both of these examples, first from the performer perspective and then from the audience perspective, to count along silently with Connor. He'll say a few of the counts out loud, and then compare that experience to counting through the audience example.
Third. Two. Five. One.
Connor uses the glockenspiel part to verbally align the 3s and 5s of each drill set with their choreography. The color guard tosses early relative to the rest of the front ensemble, but their unison catch from the audience perspective aligns with the end of the musical phrase as articulated by the glockenspiel on the end of 4. Rehearsed strategies may not transfer smoothly to perform strategies. Performers must also demonstrate training through recovering from mistakes by using both phase and period correction to adjust during live adjudicated performances. And yes, recovery is on the sheet. Here, the 2006 cadets rehearse a technique called stop and goes that freezes count 8 to 1 so the performers can both first show the final picture of a drill set with more visual emphasis through visual silence by freezing the set and recover and anticipate a change in velocity based on the next direction of their subsequent drill set. This is in the lot at Allentown. Whichever recovery strategy performers employ, a visible mistake subjects them to discipline from instructors or point deductions from adjudicators, sometimes at the value of 0.5%, which can cost you a placement in finals. Performers show their understanding of individual responsibilities by staying in time, and any perceived failure in this effort directs attention to performers. Even in this example, a warm-up lot that usually offers performers a low-stakes environment to prepare themselves physically and mentally for their show, instructors stare down and watch performers with a deep intensity. Even the fear of making a visible mistake without getting caught may affect a performer. Relief is felt as they realize they may not experience the consequences of making a visible visual error. Embodied meter training frees performers' attentional resources, but also affects body memory. The rehearsal process not only carries over into performance contexts, but also non-drum corps contexts. In their work on creating felt beats in electronic dance music, Mark Butler shows that the experience of creating a lexicon of physical memories that carry over into non-dancer contexts. By focusing on error detection and policing of expressed understandings of pulse, the North American Drum and Bugle Corps rehearsal process affects performers for the rest of their lives. Performers discipline their bodies to stay in time, or they are verbally disciplined by instructors or fellow performers. When performers internalize the correct way to navigate a section of their show, they also internalize all of the mistakes necessary to find the right solution. They remember what is correct because they learn to feel it, a memory stored in their body through discipline. This policing of visual responsibilities disproportionately affects performers whose bodies are not white, male, normatively abled, or cisgender. When gender marginalized cast members of the cadets in 2017 refused to rehearse until we were allowed to warm up with the men of the drum corps, performers refuted claims that they did not meet traditions of excellence by calling on traditions of inclusion, namely Barbara Maroney. Barbara Maroney, want to get her name right. Cadet Mellophone alumna Barbara Maroney marched in 1983 and 1984. Famous for her poise and virtuosic solos, Barb's cast member role in the cadets continues to directly affect cadet performers' body memory almost 40 years later. Barb does not have a left hand. Because her musical and social role as a veteran member and section leader was so critical to the success of the ensemble, the drum corps brass members and instructors permanently modified the way that cadets snap their horns. Instead of relying on their wrist to create a visually flashy display of strength, cadets use a process: up, stop, turn, stop, set. This is not only a more accessible way to get the horn to playing position, it recasts and reshaped the traditional horn snap as a display of strength. The cadet's adaptive horn move displaces the single count visual effect of the horn snap into a process. The horn move takes 4 beats, usually an entire bar of music, to complete. To this day, cadet cast members use the 3-stage horns up process to put their instruments up, both to honor Barb and preserve a corps-specific tradition of movement. Barb's body memory as a disabled cadet continues on as our shared cadet body memory, transforming how performers today embody horn movements. What could have been a point of exclusion transformed the drum corps. As argued by the gender marginalized cast members in 2017, social stratification worked against the bonds we had created with our fellow performers in a white male-dominated learning and performing environment. In his dissertation, Jamel Jorge examines how institutional structures like class exclusivity and performance practices of hypermasculinity have problematized the community-based roots of drum corps. He argues that forces both internal and external to the core culture can mean that not everyone has the same experience of belonging. After extensive rehearsal time and repetitive action, drum corps performers may be able to regularly achieve flow in rehearsals and performances due to both newly available attentional resources and the social dimension of rehearsals. But traumatic, aggressive, and hostile learning environments can complicate how performers approach the most fundamental task of keeping their feet in time. Recent generations of cast members have taken on the mission of resisting hegemonic masculinity in drum corps cultures by being open and supportive of fellow cast members' marginalized identities. Here's a really beautiful photo of the 2022 Bluecoats cast taken at the start of Pride Month on June 1st this year. I explore how toggling between strategies for pulse maintenance and recovery may be predicted and modeled based on performance conditions in my dissertation project. Modeling attentional shifts and predicting sources of error can create a level of objectivity in error assessment in marching arts pedagogy. Students will not be evaluated for their observable shortcomings that rely on prodigious error detection skills of instructors, but rather for their willingness to make new mistakes. The lingering effects of traditions of violent interactions between performers and instructors can be mitigated by modeling sources of error beyond individual performers. I conclude today with a hopeful but urgent call for drum corps community members and our interlocutors to move beyond discipline, beyond violence, and in the motto of my own home corps, beyond tradition. Thank you.